In a small Kansas town, a church deacon stands before his congregation on Sunday. The same man who, according to court testimony documented in a May 2025 preliminary hearing, admitted under oath to soliciting nude photographs from at least one woman in exchange for favorable treatment. There was more to come. This wasn't a fictional character from a crime thriller. No, this was Linus Thuston, a man who, according to supporters, prepared wills for soldiers free of charge, served in the National Guard, and mentored foster children, but also a man who, as county prosecutor, held enormous power over vulnerable people. The same man who, according to Sheriff Greg Taylor's investigation, allegedly pressured approximately 50 women for explicit photos. A man who had already faced attorney disciplinary action in his earliest days in office for what one editorial written by the Iola Register publishers described as accepting bribes. The sheriff's office compiled 26 allegations of misconduct by Thuston, which was reported in 2017 to the Disciplinary Administrator's Office. We filed a huge amount of formal complaints to the Disciplinary Administrators Board, which was, frankly, a joke, Neosho County's Sheriff Keith was quoted as saying. Later, Sheriff Greg Taylor, Keith's successor, had been building a case against Thuston for months. After turning over evidence to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, Taylor's investigation would ultimately document a pattern of alleged misconduct through 8 standard offense reports filed between 2018 and 2023. For Sheriff Taylor, this was a moment of courage. For Thuston's alleged victims, it was long overdue. And for former Sheriff Jim Keith, who had tried to raise concerns years earlier, it would be a vindication that came far too late. Keith would pass away before seeing the case's final resolution. This is a story of how a man moved from trusted public servant to alleged predator, how early warnings went unheeded, and how a community's willingness to believe in redemption over accountability enabled decades of escalating misconduct. Welcome to True Crime Cases You Haven't Heard. I'm your host, Steve Rode. Today we're examining how misconduct can fester and grow when accountability fails. Not just once, but repeatedly over decades. It's a story that begins with financial improprieties and ends with allegations of sexual exploitation and injustice on a shocking scale. County prosecutors wield enormous discretionary law enforcement power with minimal daily oversight. They decide who faces charges and who walks free. They determine which offenses are pursued and which are dismissed. And they recommend sentences that can alter lives forever. Multiple safeguards are supposed to protect us from abuses of this power. Ethics boards, other law enforcement agencies, county commissioners, the attorney general, judges, bar associations, federal authorities, civil courts, and ultimately, voters themselves. But what happens when each of these fails in turn? The case of Linus Thuston allows us to trace how small compromises can evolve into serious abuses when left unchecked, and how communities sometimes choose comforting myths over uncomfortable truths. Everything in this episode is based on information from public records, court documents, and media reporting. Some information comes from newspaper accounts where conflicting versions exist. Where allegations are presented, they remain allegations unless specifically noted as having been proven in court or admitted by the subject. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to tell you how you can access much of the research documentation I used to prepare for this story. Court filings, newspaper articles, official letters, videos, and other public records, so you can examine the sources for yourself. Neosho County, Kansas is a good place. It's a patchwork of small towns and farmland where everyone knows everyone, and reputations matter deeply. But even in tight-knit communities, warning signs can be ignored when they come from respected figures. Early in his career as county attorney, Linus Thuston was already raising eyebrows. According to a 2016 editorial in the Iola Register, during his first term, Thuston allegedly faced disciplinary action for 3 separate infractions: accepting bribes, overcharging the county, and misuse of public funds. But this wasn't just unsubstantiated gossip. According to the Kansas Reflector, Thuston was granted a diversion agreement by the disciplinary board in 2002 after he overbilled the county for legal services by $25,380, expensed $656 for paintball guns and ammo, and dropped criminal charges in exchange for $800 worth of office equipment. It's reported that he had to pay restitution, and his law license was placed on probation for 8 years. One case allegedly involved accepting cell phones, pager equipment, and telephone service in exchange for diversion agreements for 2 women charged with falsely reporting a crime. Some would later characterize that as a bribe, and when questioned by the state's Board of Discipline of Attorneys, Thuston reportedly argued that if community service could be accepted in lieu of criminal charges, then his personally profiting by dropping charges could be viewed similarly. The disciplinary board is said to have disagreed with that reasoning. Neosho Sheriff Jim Keith was among the first to notice troubling patterns. Justice has been for sale as long as he's been county attorney, Keith would later tell the Kansas Reflector. But raising concerns about the county attorney wasn't without risk. Keith's efforts to address Thuston's conduct reportedly contributed to creating political difficulties for the sheriff. For a time, it seemed the system might work. Voters removed Thuston from office after his first term, and the Kansas Reflector reports he lost his re-election bid in 2000 and remained out of office until 2012. This was the first critical failure. Had the disciplinary system taken stronger action in 2002, or had the voters' rejection been permanent, the escalation that followed might never have happened. Instead, the relatively lenient response sent a dangerous message that rules were flexible for those in power. Hey, if this story is resonating with you, I'd be grateful if you could help others discover it by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show reach people who need to hear these important stories. Picture Sunday morning in Chinook, Kansas. The congregation rises as Deacon Linus Thuston approaches the pulpit. His voice carries authority as he reads from Scripture about forgiveness, about second chances, and about redemption through service. Years after losing his position, Thuston had returned to office as the county prosecuting attorney. According to the Iola Register editorial, this comeback was attributed to the short memories of voters. The Kansas Reflector reported that then-Governor Sam Brownback appointed Thuston to the open seat in 2012 after he won the August primary. In the intervening years, Thuston had built a powerful public persona. According to supporter Mitch Sigg, Thuston had served over 27 years in the Kansas Army National Guard, including active duty during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He had prepared over 100 wills and powers of attorney for soldiers for free. He continued his free work for military service members and domestic violence victims, served as commander of the Chinook VFW, worked on the Kansas National Guard Suicide Prevention Team and PTSD Response Team, became a deacon in his church and served on numerous community boards, and also became a foster care provider and mentor. When the Iola Register published an editorial warning voters about Thuston's history, the response revealed the sophisticated narrative Thuston had constructed. His July 2016 letter to the editor laid bare his strategy. I am so very happy that my personal Savior, Jesus Christ, is different than the editor of the Iowa Register. First, God is all-knowing and God never makes mistakes. I'm willing to admit that I am not perfect and I have made mistakes. I told the people of Neosho County in 2012 that my mission was to gain redemption. My credibility is enhanced because I know what it's like to be accused. This made me a better lawyer, he wrote. By invoking his personal Savior, Jesus Christ, and positioning himself as redeemed, Thuston had weaponized redemption theology. Criticism wasn't accountability, it was persecution. His experience with allegations wasn't disqualifying, it was qualifying. He had turned potential weakness into claimed strengths. This represents the second critical failure. When impressive credentials and religious language overshadowed documented misconduct, the community unknowingly enabled an environment where accountability became optional. By accepting these narratives, community members would inadvertently subject others around them to the escalating allegations that Thuston cut lenient deals with rapists and sexually exploited women. After Thuston's return to office, the documented allegations revealed increasingly serious patterns. What began as financial improprieties evolved into something far more troubling. According to Sheriff Taylor's investigation, a woman complained in 2022 that Thuston had asked her for nude photos in order to continue providing legal services. The sheriff stated that she sent the photos because she felt like she had no other choice, even though she didn't want to. The allegations were not merely based on testimony. Investigators obtained a warrant for Thuston's social media messages, and with the assistance from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, found evidence of these interactions. Most significantly, in a July 2024 court hearing, Thuston himself admitted under oath to the conduct. When questioned by defense attorney Sarah Hill about his judgment in trying to cultivate an informant that you requested naked pictures from, Thuston responded, "Have I ever made a request for pictures for somebody? Yes, I have." Thuston allegedly maintained a diversion menu, with fees ranging from $75 to $1,500, essentially letting defendants, including rapists and child rapists, buy their way out of serious charges while accused of lying to judges and victims' families about his intentions. In one example, Thuston told the judge he had notified the mother of the terms of the plea deal before presenting it in court. But in a private meeting with the mother, which she secretly recorded and shared with the Kansas Reflector, he actually said he would bring more serious charges. In a particularly disturbing revelation, the Kansas Disciplinary Administrator's Office issued an informal admonition to Thuston in April of 2024 for telling County Health Director Teresa Starr she owed him oral sex. Starr's ordeal with Thuston ran even deeper. She had been the victim of a violent rape, and Thuston wanted to make a plea deal with her attacker. "Why am I mostly concerned about Linus? I'm the one that was raped," Starr said. "So if he lets him go, there's nothing I can do about it. They've not called one of my witnesses, and they haven't even asked me who my witnesses are." This escalation pattern reveals the deadly cost of institutional cowardice. Each time authorities had the power to stop Thuston and choose not to, he became bolder and more women and children paid the price. When the disciplinary board gave him a slap on the wrist in 2002, instead of disbarring him, they sent a message that rules were optional. When voters rejected him but the system allowed him back in 2012, they enabled his comeback. When county commissioners complained about his finances but took no decisive action, they let him operate with impunity. What began as overbilling for paintball guns became sexually exploiting approximately 50 women because every institution that could have stopped him chose comfort over courage. For months, Sheriff Taylor had been quietly building his case. Now, it was time to act. The Neosho County Commissioners sit around their long desk as Sheriff Greg Taylor approaches, a folder of evidence in his hand. Then something happens the viewers can see for themselves in the video. Just as Taylor prepares to present his findings, the commissioners rise from their seats and leave the room. What follows is captured on video. Sheriff Greg Taylor, now alone with County Attorney Linus Thuston, finally doing what Sheriff Keith had attempted years earlier, confronting the evidence. The timing is, at minimum, remarkable. With no commissioners present to witness what's about to unfold, Taylor begins his confrontation. In the empty room with the meeting camera rolling, Taylor presents his evidence. The exchange that follows would become crucial testimony in later proceedings. Have you ever traded sexual favors or nude pictures for representing clients? Taylor asks, according to the video transcript. The video shows Taylor displaying documents to Thuston. So when you're asking her for nude images, that's not for representation? Taylor presses. What happens next would later become evidence in court proceedings. As we heard earlier, when questioned months later by defense attorney Sarah Hill about his conduct, Thuston would admit under oath, "Have I ever made a request for pictures from somebody?" "Yes, I have." The confrontation that Sheriff Keith had tried to initiate years earlier was finally happening. The evidence was now on the record, but the officials with the power to act, they were nowhere to be found. What Taylor had uncovered through his documented evidence was substantial. The pattern of alleged misconduct included soliciting nude photographs from female defendants he had prosecuted, inappropriate sexual advances, leaking confidential law enforcement information, and the misuse of county resources. Thuston's response was swift and allegedly retaliatory. According to court filings, his subsequent actions would lead to felony perjury and witness intimidation charges related to attempts to obstruct an investigation. This wasn't the first time Thuston had allegedly falsified documentation. In 2022, a disciplinary panel decided not to punish Thuston for a conflict of interest ethics violation after reviewing letters of support from the community, including one from County Health Director Teresa Starr. However, Thuston had written Starr's letter himself, which he later admitted in a recorded interview with the Kansas Reflector. Even more troubling, Starr said Thuston had threatened her to go along with the deception. By the time Sheriff Taylor finally stepped forward, the alleged misconduct had escalated far beyond what Sheriff Keith had originally witnessed. The progression from financial impropriety to alleged mass exploitation had taken place over a period of time, with multiple intervention points where courageous action by others might have changed the trajectory entirely. Following Sheriff Taylor's investigation, the Kansas Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against Thuston. But the charges were shockingly limited. Despite Sheriff Taylor's investigation, documenting what he described as several felonies, including sexual extortion, multiple instances of perjury, theft by deception, forgery, witness intimidation, and interfering with public business, the Attorney General charged Thuston with just 2 misdemeanors: violating the Retailer's Sales Tax Act and misuse of a small amount of public funds. The charges were revealing in their simplicity and limitations. Most notable by their absence were any charges related to what Sheriff Taylor considered sexual extortion. And despite the Kansas Bureau of Investigation Reviewing the evidence, the Attorney General's office elected not to pursue these charges. Sheriff Taylor expressed disappointment. "I think it's a huge disservice to the citizens of Neosho County that they picked 2 petty misdemeanors out of several felonies." The first charge involved Thuston buying a $17,000 Chevrolet Camaro for his wife, but submitting paperwork saying it only cost $11,000, avoiding over $600 in sales tax. The second concerned a $64 payment to a woman who had sent him nude photos, which he claimed was for Christmas presents for her children, but he had made that payment using his county credit card. This prosecutorial discretion represents the third critical failure. When overwhelming evidence of serious misconduct results in minimal charges, it sends a message that some forms of abuse of power are effectively consequence-free. Eventually, Thuston negotiated a plea agreement with the Attorney General's office to misdemeanor counts of official misconduct in exchange for a recommended sentence of probation only. No jail time. He also agreed to retire from office and surrender his law license. Jim Keith, with over 30 years in law enforcement, was equally disturbed by the Attorney General's handling of the case. Rather than filing those felonies Taylor had documented, the AG's office had apparently allowed Thuston to negotiate his charges in advance. I just have to tell you, in all my years of law enforcement, and there were 30-some of them, I never saw a defendant get called to the Attorney General's office to negotiate their deal before charges are ever filed, Keith said. I don't know how you explain that. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard of, and I don't understand it at all. But at the sentencing hearing, something unexpected happened. District Judge Merlin Wheeler reviewed the plea agreement and made a rare decision. He rejected the recommendation for probation. Even at this moment, Thuston fell back on his familiar script. I admit that I have made mistakes, and I admit that I have sinned, but I am a recovering sinner, he said at the September 4th, 2024 hearing. But Judge Wheeler was having none of it. He delivered his decision with unmistakable clarity. There is no way that I can look at this and condone what you did here. It also impairs the credibility of everyone that holds public office. Instead of probation, Wheeler sentenced Thuston to 120 days in jail and ordered him to pay restitution. After serving 30 days, Thuston would be eligible for 12 months of supervised probation. The Attorney General's press release that followed was a masterpiece of political spin. Despite having negotiated a deal that would have let Thuston avoid jail entirely, Attorney General Chris Kobach declared, Mr. Thuston's conviction should stand as an example to others. No matter who you are or what office you hold, everyone must follow the law. Now, the irony is staggering. Kobach was taking credit for consequences his own office had tried to help Thuston avoid. It was Judge Wheeler, not the Attorney General, who ensured Thuston faced real consequences. Stories like this one matter because they expose how accountability really works, or doesn't work. If you think others should hear this, please consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help spread the word. But even after the courtroom doors closed, and Thuston was led away to begin serving time, the story and the failures weren't over. While still on probation, Thuston was charged with felony perjury and witness intimidation related to his attempts to obstruct the investigation. In May 2025, after a preliminary hearing, Thuston was ordered to stand trial for 3 felony counts of perjury. The charges relate to his testimony in a drug case where he allegedly lied about his relationship with confidential informants. The trial is scheduled for September 2025. Despite his conviction and jail sentence, the conditions of his sentence dictated that he must self-report ethical violations to the state board that handles attorney discipline, which could result in the forfeiture of his law license. Self-reporting? Remarkably, as of the recording of this episode, a search of the Kansas Bar Association reveals something I find shocking. Despite his criminal conviction, jail sentence, and ongoing felony charges, Linus Thuston's law license is still reported as active. This represents perhaps the most glaring failure of professional accountability in the entire case. An online search for Thuston's law office in Chanute shows it permanently closed. Maybe that's a final chapter in a career marked by repeated allegations of misconduct and the gradual, belated functions of accountability systems that should have acted much sooner. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the failures, but the individuals who persisted despite them. People who risked their careers and reputations to uphold the integrity of the justice system. Sheriff Jim Keith stands as the story's early hero. Years before the full-scale allegations would come to light, Keith warned that justice has been for sale. Even after leaving office due to frustration with Thuston, Keith continued to advocate for accountability. When a special prosecutor eventually filed felony charges, Keith welcomed the decision, though he remained critical of the earlier handling. His focus remained on the victims. He said, "I can't help but think about all the victims over the years, those 50 ladies, just all the victims in general." Jim Keith passed away on March 17, 2025, at just 56 years old, never living to see Thuston finally face the serious consequences Keith had long believed were warranted. The Iola Register, which published an editorial warning voters about Thuston's history despite potential community backlash, they demonstrated the essential role of local journalism in holding power accountable. The newspaper's warning proved well-founded, but it wasn't enough to prevent Thuston's return to power. Whether voters didn't see the editorial, didn't believe it, or simply prioritized other factors, the result was the same. The accountability mechanism of an informed electorate failed to function when it mattered most. Sheriff Greg Taylor, who gathered evidence and turned over evidence to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, continuing the work Keith had begun years earlier. His courage in documenting evidence and confronting Thuston publicly provided the foundation for what accountability finally occurred. Judge Merlin Wheeler, who rejected the lenient plea agreement and insisted on jail time, recognizing that probation would fail to address the seriousness of the offenses. These individuals remind us that systems ultimately depend on people with the courage to hold power accountable, even when institutional structures and community dynamics make that extraordinarily difficult. Their actions demonstrate that integrity isn't just a personal virtue, it's an essential public good that sustains the foundations of justice itself. But their courage also highlights a sobering truth. How many people suffered because the system required such extraordinary individual heroism to function as it should have. The story of Linus Thuston reveals a tragic truth. And much of this suffering was preventable. The system offered multiple intervention points over decades, meaningful disciplinary action in 2002, permanent electoral rejection in 2000, serious consequences from the state bar, intervention by colleagues who witnessed the contradictions between Thuston's public persona and private conduct. Each missed opportunity allowed the alleged misconduct to escalate, harming more people in increasingly serious ways. The progression from overbilling for paintball guns to allegedly coercing women into sexual exploitation didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual erosion enabled by a system that consistently chose the path of least resistance, lenient diversion agreements, instead of meaningful consequences, comfortable myths instead of uncomfortable truths, institutional accommodation instead of courageous confrontation. Perhaps most troubling is how Thuston masterfully exploited the community's desire to believe in redemption. Each time he successfully used religious language to deflect accountability, his predatory behavior escalated. His sophisticated manipulation turned potential consequences into persecution narratives, past misconduct into claimed wisdom. What should have been moments of reckoning became validation that his methods worked. The faith community's emphasis on forgiveness became a shield that enabled increasingly serious crimes rather than a path towards genuine reform. Thuston is not the only prosecutor to face such serious allegations about abusing the responsibilities of office. But I bet you haven't heard his story before. Unlike in Wisconsin, where prosecutor Kevin Kratz, who gained national attention for his role in the Stephen Avery case, featured in Netflix's Making a Murderer, faced multiple accusations of sexual misconduct. According to investigative documents, Kratz was accused by multiple women of using his official position to coerce them into sexual conversations and acts, and of bragging about high-profile cases to impress women he wanted to date. Like Thuston, Kratz allegedly exploited the power imbalance inherent in his position, turning the justice system into a tool for personal exploitation. These cases reveal how prosecutorial power, when unchecked, can corrupt even those who once served honorably. The very authority meant to protect the vulnerable becomes a weapon against them. This case forces us to confront fundamental questions. When systems consistently fail to intervene meaningfully, who bears responsibility for the escalating harm? How do we distinguish genuine redemption from sophisticated manipulation? And what changes might prevent future abuses of power? For Sheriff Jim Keith, who first tried to sound the alarm years ago, justice came too late. His passing in March 2025, before seeing the culmination of accountability he had sought. It serves as a poignant reminder that the wheels of justice often turn too slowly for those who first speak up. And for the women who allegedly endured exploitation that might have been prevented with earlier decisive action, the cost of systemic failure is immeasurable. The law office that once housed Thuston's practice now sits closed. But the broader questions this case raises about accountability, power, and institutional courage remain as urgent as ever. So, here's my question for you. When you see early warning signs of misconduct in our own communities, even when the person has impressive credentials, even when they speak the language of redemption, what responsibility do we bear to act? How many people might be spared if we choose courage over comfort, accountability over convenience? Visit truecrimeunheard.com, find this episode, and leave your comment with your thoughts. I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this crucial issue. As promised, if you'd like to examine the research documentation behind this story, including court filings, newspaper articles, official correspondence, and other public records I used, you can find much of it published on the episode page at truecrimeunheard.com. I'll also provide the link to the October 2022 video of Sheriff Taylor's confrontation with Thuston. You can watch this dramatic accountability moment for yourself. The research materials contain additional documented allegations and instances concerning behavior that, while part of the public record, are too disturbing to include in this episode. These materials provide a fuller picture of the scope of allegations for those who need to understand the complete context, particularly professionals working within justice system oversight. This transparency is part of our commitment to documentary-level journalism, and it's especially valuable for law enforcement professionals, attorneys, and others who must work within these systems. Thank you for listening to True Crime Cases You Haven't Heard. If you found this episode valuable, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Those 5-star reviews really help me to reach more people who need to hear these important stories. And next week, I'll explore another overlooked case that raises important questions about our justice system. Remember, a justice system deserves our trust only when everyone within it, especially those with the most power, are truly accountable.